Well, welcome. This is our volume 2 of R&D and the IRS war stories. Welcome back, or welcome to this first time you're watching. We are going through and just talking about different experiences that we've had working with the IRS, specifically around the R&D credit. And so with that, we wanted to jump in and not really repeat a bunch of things that we talked about last time. I'm Mark Dunning, and this is Sean Espy, both with the firm TaxOps. And I wanted to start out with, we talked a little bit last time about some examinations that we've had that lasted for a long, long time. And Sean talked about one lasting 7 years. I had one that lasted about 10 years. I was not at the start of that one, so I don't feel all the pain of being on an examination that lasts for 10 years. But it was really interesting. It was a software-related company or technology-related company, and it was a kind of a beginning level in terms of working with software and be able to have companies make electronic payments. And it was really interesting is that this taxpayer, first of all, the IRS thinks historically, not as much anymore, but earlier in the beginning days, they used to think that anything that was software was internal use software, and they don't like internal use software. But this very large company went through, and they were one of the first companies to set up electronic funds transfer. And in fact, it was pretty funny is that the IRS was like, well, this is internal use software. And we're all like, no, it's external. Other companies can get online and can use their software, use their website, use this, the software. And the IRS was like, well, no, you can't. And we're all like, yes, you can. In fact, one of the largest projects they had was setting up for the government to be able to have taxpayers pay the government electronically. And that was one of their projects. And so we were like laughing at them and saying, hey, the government is one of the customers here. And we go look it up. And so it was just so interesting that we had to battle that exercise there for a little bit. But this one company is that the IRS was just trying to come up with and disallow it, not only for internal use software, which we were proving that it was external. We were showing them all their clients, and we were showing them how they were doing work, keeping things confidential, of course. But the concern that I had, or the thing that was the most disappointing, is that the IRS was not trying to understand, not seeking to understand. They were just full on disallowing. And the IRS, and we pushed back quite a bit on that, and they said, hey, we are the guardians of the treasury for the government. And we're like, okay, we understand that. But we also are Americans, and you are not allowing the law to be what it should be and allowing the treasury funds to be where they should be, because, as we talked about earlier, the R&D credit is set up to incentivize companies to have engineers here in the U.S. And by holding on to the purse strings, they were just inappropriately disallowing things, or just stalling, or not allowing it for it. And so that was, I guess, just a big gripe that I have was, hey, do the right thing, IRS. Don't just sit there and delay and hold because you think it's your money. It's not your money. It's the government's money. It's the treasury's money. It's Americans' money. And so anyway, so that was just kind of a real disappointment thing. We eventually got it and got through it, and eventually had a good, decent resolution. It's just too bad that it took 10 years and 10 years of interest and all that stuff to come to a resolution. All right. John, you came from the Big Four more recently than I did. It's been a good 15 years for me. Any kind of thoughts or input on what you're seeing in terms of the Big Four, or maybe even other boutique R&D taxpayer provider companies with the R&D credit, and just what you're kind of seeing out there and how, I guess, combative it's getting, and just kind of what your thoughts are on all that?
Yes. So you mentioned the Big Four, right? And certainly there are methodologies that are apart and separate. I would say that the Big Four uh, use in conducting research credit studies that are perhaps different than, say, other firms, and they certainly, um, I think, on occasion exchange ideas as to certain positions. And as I have noticed, I've worked at a couple of the two of the Big Four that currently exist, and in general, they have their own positions, right? And they don't share um, some of the details of those positions. But I have noticed that as you go to a Big Four, those positions are rooted on occasion, um, unique positions that some might say are aggressive.
Okay.
And of course, with the aggressiveness comes the ability to support those positions, or in some cases, no ability to support the position. And perhaps it's based on a legal position. So, for instance, I think of just in general, contingent fees, right? Contingent fees were basically killed in 2002, right? With Sarbanes-Oxley, Enron, Anderson dying, all of that. However, there was a case that came along that Ridgely versus Commissioner that talked about a specific opportunity to claim a contingent fee, right? With those certain circumstances of that case and those facts. So you have to be, it's very fact specific, and you have to be meeting those requirements. And the Big Four, of course, is relegated under Circular 230. Um, the SEC, PCAOB, all of the regulatory bodies that they are beholden to, that some of the smaller boutique firms are not, because they don't, for instance, perform audits. So there's a difference of thinking. There's a difference of aggressive positions, like taking a contingent fee, charging a contingent fee um, in a regulated environment, maybe versus not. And I would say the Big Four, maybe even the Big Six, depending on how you look at the firms, will say yes, we are obligated to follow the regulatory bodies, and we can't charge contingent fees. However, there are a few that follow the Ridgely case and say, yes, we can. And right, so there are differences there in interpretation, and in, say, aggressiveness, you might say, versus conservatism on some of the details of the credits. Even more than that, though, you have some of the small boutique firms who are not beholden to the regulatory bodies and just charge contingent fees because, well, they can. They don't care about things like the Ridgely case or being fact specific. They go in and charge contingent fees. And there is one well-known firm here in Denver that failed because of that, because all they charged were contingent fees. And you and I were just talking about them, and it's I think interesting to note that they were extremely aggressive. I think you mentioned that you had even more experience, or you know more about that particular firm than I do.
Yeah, I knew one of the people that was on there. I don't want to get too specific and talk about how he couldn't pass the CPA exam, so therefore he jumped around some different things that were quite aggressive. Anyway, but keep going. More specific thoughts about, instead of just Circular 230 and not having a incentive-based study that they're trying to just totally milk the government
Yes.
of money. But how about in terms of just R&D
In,
specific
yes.
aggressive?
Yes. So certainly industries, right? You think of the research credit and the history of it. Uh, the first area that comes to mind is software, right? Back in 2000, and I guess beginning of 2001, and then again at the end of 2001, we had two separate regulations around software. Right, we had the January set and we had the December set, and the IRS at one point said, "Well, you just choose whichever one you want to follow." Um, and then there are so that's an industry, right? Software where I would say at the time, the big four, big five, even were interested in pursuing software and regularly pursued it. I know that I did when I was with the big four, and it was all around software and what you could include and what you couldn't. Reading those regs very, very carefully and closely to understand, well, where is the line? Well, we know the IRS is always going to take something back, but that line was around internal use software and the additional three-part test versus not. And I would say if you fast forward to the new regs that came out, well, not so new, but 10 years ago, that really freed up internal use software to allow us to call a lot of software non-internal use software, therefore not subject to the additional three-part test, but rather allowing the taxpayer to interact with a third party and what that definition looks like and where you can push the line there, for instance. So software as a general industry or a general field, right, is something that I would say the big four are perhaps a little more aggressive around with regard to those regs. Another area for me personally was always engineering and construction. And as I mentioned on the previous call, and talking about that one particular IRS engineer who said engineering's not qualifiable for the research credit, well, it absolutely is. But then where do you draw the line there, right? Are they building, say, a building, in other words, a fixed asset? And do you look at that building holistically to maybe perhaps see it as a prototype? And the prototype argument that sort of has evolved, I would say, starting more in say other fields like say aerospace, and then taking that and applying that in ENC, engineering and construction, is a whole different ballgame. And where do you draw the line there? What is aggressive versus what isn't? Do you call that new structure that maybe is the first of its kind a prototype? But within engineering and construction, as opposed to, say, a field like aerospace, where you've launched a satellite into space and you can't touch it again, right? So there are differences and nuances, areas of aggressiveness and conservatism in both that I think if you look at the different firms, they're going to look at the facts differently, very, very differently. And so I think we always need to be paying attention to our clients as to where they want to draw the line, because ultimately this is their credit, this is their position, this is their tax return. And for them to tell us, well, where is the line that you want to draw?
Yeah, there's some great points there. Great points. One of the things that I guess that kind of that disappoints me is a lot of times these VP of tax or these tax directors, they're looking to our firms to help them understand and make that decision. And if one is being way aggressive and saying, oh, yeah, this can all easily qualify, but not being, hey, it could qualify, but you could get a lot of pushback from the IRS. And not only pushback, but you're going to get a full disallowance. And then you're lucky to have success at appeals. But yet these aggressive firms turn around and say, oh, no, we're just doing a better or more complete job. And it's really the other firms that are not doing as complete a job as they should be. And so, be aware, you VP of tax or tax directors, that you need to be paying attention and understanding and listening to everybody, So you can understand who is being aggressive and who is not. One client that we had that we did a pre-filing agreement for, we did it back 20 some years ago. And then we've been following the same methodology with the IRS claims every year with the R&D credit, and filing it on originally filed returns, just calculating this R&D credit exactly consistent with the methodology we used before. Things were going along really well. We even had a couple of examinations where the IRS came in after, years later, and reviewed everything and actually just did a check audit. And they just checked to make sure we were following the things we should. It was a big enough client where they were under continuous audit. And so it's not like we could be sneaking around doing something really weird. But they came in and reviewed some of these years and they said, yeah, you're doing what you promised to be doing. It does still look reasonable. 100% allowance. And it was pretty quick. So I gotta give the kudos to the IRS when is some intelligence there and some reasonableness. But then we had, just a couple of years ago, one of the big four firms that was local to this very large company came in and said, oh, you've got a small firm like TaxOps doing it. What do they know? We're a big four firm. We're so much smarter than everybody else. And they said, without even looking at the study, they said, we can double the credit. And of course, we were pushing back to the new VP of tax. The old VP of tax retired and was happy and consent because everything went great and went well. But this new VP of tax started listening to the aggressive big four firm and thought, oh, you guys could double the credit. And when we heard that they made that claim, we got a full-on listing of every single engineer and technician that this company had, which was into the thousands. And we showed them, hey, we are looking at everybody. Now, maybe this person here could be a little bit high, or maybe this person here should be a little bit lower. But we had time reporting systems. We had the full listing of every credentialed engineer and technician in the entire company. There is no way they could double the credit. There's just no way. But this new VP of tax just was drinking the Kool-Aid of this of this big four. And we were just out of luck because we were not this big four firm that could just, I don't know. I'm not really sure what we could have done better, but needless to say, we lost the case, the project going forward. Right. I do have some more stories about pending IRS examinations after that, where we had two IRS teams, one reviewing our study from the mid-2010s to that current year, 22, 23. And then they then had a separate examination team that reviewed the current year, 23 study for this big four firm. And looking back at them, because they went back and amended their returns, doubling the credit. And we were just like, this is insane. Anyway, both IRS examinations were going on at the same time. We were kicked off the current studies, but we were supporting our study. Well, the IRS teams were working on both, and they started talking to each other, and they started listening and going, well, yeah, these guys over here, our group, this seems reasonable. You've got support for everything. You've got time reporting for everything. And then this other group just being very, very fluid, very vague. And, but then once you know it, instead of us winning, even though we heard the IRS saying, hey, we're going to be agreeing with you at 100%, and we're disallowing these guys. But before we know it, this big four firm, through this VP of tax, got us kicked off. And so we could no longer even work our examination And
Mhm.
I'm sure this big four firm said, hey, let's just have one firm do everything and it'll be cheaper for you. But anyway, so that's kind of the mess where we got kicked off of. But I was just so disappointed that it's like people weren't trying to do the right thing. Anyway, go ahead, John.
I think a lot of what you're saying resonates with my career and my experiences because I've been at in industry. I've been at two of the big four. I've been at a smaller firm, and now I'm at a smaller firm again. And I will tell a lot of the folks who are listening, as taxpayers, our audience out there, perhaps, that you have to really understand the scope of what you're looking to claim. You have to understand your level of comfort with, as I mentioned, an aggressive or conservative or somewhere in the middle position, and how much you're willing to pay, and then maybe the time as well, the amount of time you're willing to dedicate, right, to claiming research, which we passionately believe is ours. Um, and if you look at all of those areas, and if you look at the code, just straight up with the code, Congress intended for this credit to be very, very broad. And there are a lot of different positions, a lot of different um, uh, areas that you can look at uh, in the credit, and be aggressive or be conservative. And you really have to pay attention to who is providing that service to you, and understand where their position is on being conservative or aggressive in all of those, and where they think they will win with the IRS. Because on its face, if you just look at the law, a lot of areas, a lot of activities will qualify for the credit. But then reality is a big part of this, and the IRS is a big part of this. And you have to understand, well, where is the IRS going to legitimately allow you or settle with you on the activities that you have claimed? And there are so many nuances. There are so many areas. There are so many just around the country, even different cities that of teams of IRS agents who allow you more than, say, in other areas. I can tell you, at one time, New York was better to settle in than in Texas, within the IRS, within the same organization. And you would expect that the IRS agents would all be the same, but they're just not. And so you really have to pay attention to your service provider. I would say their experience, and those 4 or 5 areas that I mentioned, as to where you want to draw the line, as to how much time, how much money you want to dedicate to this, and where is that sweet spot in claiming the research credit and successfully claiming it, Mark, as you have for many years now.
Yeah. I feel bad for those tax payers that just don't do their homework and don't understand enough, and kind of take what one person or one firm says, and they don't kind of understand the situation a little bit better. So that's too bad. I was going to talk a little bit more about some of the state examinations, because we see those and it seems to be very similar. You sounds like you've got some experience with Texas. I've claimed a lot of credit in Texas, but I've not had an examination in Texas. I've had a few in California, but to me, it seems like it's more of the same. The same type of engineers looking and thinking with limited experience and educational background, and
Mm-hmm.
and just trying to disallow things front. We had
Right.
two, one more recent, one a number of years ago, where this was just the state of California coming after these clients. And the
Mm-hmm.
funny thing about it is the IRS already looked at it and passed on it. And so that always made us wonder, wait a minute, California, if
Mm-hmm.
the IRS already on it because they're figuring, hey, this is likely qualifying, and whether they reviewed it before in the past, but they did their basic review to say it seems like R&D, and then to have California, true, they might be bankrupt and really need the money, but to come along and just fight the fight themselves. It's just like, you guys,
Right.
the IRS basically conceded that it's qualifying, and now you guys are coming along and just wasting all this time with less experience and less support than the IRS has of doing these examination. I don't know. Any thoughts on some of the states and different things like that you've been seeing?
Absolutely, for sure. And without a doubt, the California Franchise Tax Board, the FTB, is aggressive. And I would say they're very similar to the IRS from that perspective. Big state, a lot of taxpayers, lots of high dollar credits. So that absolutely will always make sense, I think, for California. I think of it, as you mentioned, Texas. Texas has gone through a lot of changes over the last, I'd say, 10 years, even, because one of my audits was a very specific industry. It was again, the E&C industry, and they just simply didn't like it at all. And so I had I think a 4-year audit that concluded with nothing. And you just kind of have to understand that at some point you're not going to convince an auditor with unlimited time and perhaps resources that you qualify for the credit. Unlike perhaps with the IRS, where there is an ebb and flow of a requirement, if you will, to settle. Texas, in and of itself, has gone from, I think, disallowing a lot to more recently revising their regulations to allow more to qualify. And I think that has helped them. But I think if you sit back and look, and you sort of alluded to with California, their state budget and where they are, that sort of informs you as to how much of flexibility they're going to have in allowing credits. Because I know for years, the oil and gas industry in Texas were claiming credits, and the coffers in Texas were very dry, and so they really started pulling back on allowing research credits. At least anecdotally, that's what I heard. To fast forward to now, to where the regulations have changed, and as I said, they're allowing a lot more. It was well known they didn't like software. It was well known they didn't like stat samples. It was well known that if you weren't producing a product, a tangible product in Texas, they were likely going to disallow it. I think of other states, right, and it's different. It's a mixed bag with other states. I know, for instance, in Ohio, they created an R&D task force to basically say, hey, we're going to review all claims, and they started disallowing more and more research credits against the CAT tax in Ohio, right? Just because, again, they had, I think, a lean budget. Then I think of Arizona. Arizona, for the longest time, did not allow the alternative simplified credit, even though it was codified, even though they said basically that they would follow Fed. They only had the traditional, the regular credit available. But I know in one case, maybe 3 or 4 cases, where the ASC was claimed and was argued successfully that, hey, you all will accept the ASC. And finally, last year, they codified the ASC. Not unlike Utah did many, many years ago, where there was a case then, probably 15, 16 years ago, where the ASC was filed, and they changed. So I guess point being is that you have to really stay up to date with the states, and understand that they may change their positioning for various reasons, and you have to be willing to work with them. Yeah, because things are going to change.
Yeah, I've got an interesting story with the state of Iowa. Iowa's had a refundable credit, meaning even if you're not paying any tax, if you get this R&D credit there in the state of Iowa, they will just pay you back and pay you a refund for what you deserve. And they must have thought that was good, or maybe not a lot of engineers were in the state of Iowa. But we had one taxpayer that had a lot of leased computer costs. And this one taxpayer, well, Google Cloud Platform and AWS, Amazon Web Services, are obviously very large companies. And one part of the R&D credit, a lot of times you're not really paying attention to this, but leased computer costs or developmental cloud computing or hosting of developmental activities qualifies for the credit. I mean, originally started underneath law that happened before when the government had these big computers and no one was using them. So they decided to throw that into the credit so people would use these governmental computers. Well, now the lease of computing costs for developmental costs, that world has totally changed with all this cloud platform activities. Anyway, this one taxpayer was moving along and paying a lot of money to Google to do their cloud development, cloud hosting costs. Well, Google moved into Iowa and had this huge, big server farm where they had all this development going on their servers. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, the state of Iowa freaked out because all of a sudden, you didn't have a lot of people in Iowa, but you have all these servers in Iowa, and it's where the work is being done. So these servers are in Iowa. And all of a sudden, you get these companies that barely have anybody in the state of Iowa, but Google's there. And all of a sudden, now you go from no credits going to certain companies to all of a sudden very large leased computer costs, credits, not only coming to a company, but needing to be refunded because they weren't paying tax there. I mean, now Google tax there, but these companies weren't. And so it was so interesting that we're arm wrestling with the state of Iowa on this credit, and they're trying to claim, well, you got to have people here doing the work. It's like, it's that process of experimentation. Well, these algorithms are going on in Iowa. It's where the work is being done. And even though they might minimal people, this is where the work is being done and the costs are being incurred. So it was interesting. We just got pushed back and pushed back. And as we were getting pushed back from Iowa, all of a sudden you hear that Iowa changes their law, no longer allowing leasehold computer costs to be included in the credit. Now, our cases are still at appeals for Iowa to decide things, but you can know that, hey, there's an issue there, or the company deserves that credit if they subsequently change the law to disallow it. So it's something there. So we're just playing the waiting game with Iowa to get these credits. So interesting.
For sure. And it will continue.
Yeah. Not necessarily specifically to Circular 230 and the incentive-based contracts that a lot of these firms have with clients. How about in terms of just qualifying things? Knowing that Sean are with TaxOps, you don't have a huge national tax practice with a bunch of attorneys that are just sitting there and pounding on the poor IRS on things. With the size of firm that you're with now, is that making you change how you would qualify things for certain clients?
I think, back to my earlier point, discussing with the client what they really want and taking the time to really fully explain that to client is tremendously more important. I will have more time, right, to do that, right? I mean, this transition is, as we both know, is relatively new. But to take more time to discuss that and to truly explain to the client that maybe there are areas that are more aggressive and areas that we would want to reserve for, right? Specifically for that aggressiveness, if you want to move in that direction. And I have one example in mind of where it was at a firm in that it was a cement company in that space, so engineering and construction. where we went in, we performed the study, and we identified approximately 25% of the credit that was more in that more aggressive bucket, right? And we reserved for it. And I'll say the taxpayer, the client reserved for it. And we had an IRS audit. And with the IRS audit, we said, okay, well, Mr. IRS auditor, here is an area, meaning that 25%, that you could maybe look at. And we provided, hey, and of course we in the natural course of an IRS audit answered the IDRs as expected, right, and not handing everything over, et cetera. But through the course of the audit, right, we sort of made it clear that, hey, there was this part of the credit that was maybe more aggressive, and lo and behold, we settled that audit for 75%. And the IRS took exactly what we wanted them to take because we were cautious about what we claimed. And that in that particular instance, I was at a smaller firm, which was sort of the mentality that I had at the time. And I would say through my career, that has changed. It's ebbed and flowed, and it really is, as you alluded to, whether you have, say, maybe that army of attorneys or not, to help support that position, or maybe take that more aggressive approach. And I think now that I look back on everything, it's always got to be that conversation with your client as to where you want to draw the line, what's aggressive, what's not, and identifying that along the way and taking the time, most importantly, to do that.
Bringing up some great points. A couple of things I just want to repeat is I love how you let them know, hey, this is more aggressive. Let's reserve for that. And then it was also nice that as during the examination, you're going through and battling for everything that should normally qualify, or that easily qualifies, and then allowing the IRS to then go in this area that might be more gray. It still meets the requirements. It's not like you're qualifying garbage, but is a little bit more gray, maybe more of the manufacturing engineering that the IRS tends not to like, or some of the software stuff. Is this really, really significant change here? But I like that. We've had a lot of success doing that as well with you, by letting the IRS, by qualifying some of the stuff that's not black, that's wrong. You're just qualifying some of the stuff that's kind of more gray. And if the IRS focuses on the gray, that means they should hopefully be allowing the stuff that is clean, that is simple, that is easy. I also want to bring up a thing that you said is taxpayers need to know that they can't just sit there and play the audit lottery. You need to be able to plan as if, and have the studies perform as if the IRS is going to show up. That is how it should be. That is where you meet your, more likely than not that it can stand. And you need to be able to have that burden. And you have to be able to do that up front. And some small little R&D boutique companies will be like, well, let's just claim it and we'll do this work later. No, you need to make sure that the company doing your work that you're paying for does the work up front. Now, you're not going to be able to do all the work that every single kind of question that the IRS is going to ask, but you can do a good minimum amount of work, not zero, but a good amount of work with all the stuff there and ready to go. But don't pay for garbage of R&D boutique companies that don't do it.
And know what you're paying for. So taxpayer, know what you are paying for, understand the scope, right? Because if they're not going to if they're not going to cover the basics in this day and age, for instance, covering what a business component is and identifying your business components, you're not even getting what you need as a basis
Yes.
for covering your burden of proof to the IRS.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where they're.
Great point. Because in that first IDR that's on the IRS website about what is doing in an audit and what's the first IDR they send for an R&D credit, it has everything by business component. And so if your study's not being done by business component, you didn't pay for anything. You just basically gave your money away to someone that you shouldn't have. So great point. That's a really good point. Another thought I just wanted to share was, I like you said earlier about the states, but the IRS acts the same way as if they have unlimited time. No one has unlimited time, but sometimes you just have to outlast the IRS. And if you know you're doing everything right and you've been providing everything right, you just need to make sure the taxpayer has some patience and doesn't get, hey, we need this money now. And this is, no, that's just not how things work, unfortunately. You just have to have patience and allow for the examination to take its course and make sure things are properly reserved for. But don't, sometimes it's the last one standing. And so you need to stick with what is correct and keep on standing if you've got the proper claim.
Yes, for sure.
Other things that you are thinking about that you wanted to share here in our last little bit on this volume 2.
I think I'm always going to point out to taxpayers when I first meet, say, a new potential client, that first of all, you have to understand who is sitting across the table from you, right? And the level of experience that they are bringing to you, because the research credit is so nuanced. It is one of the largest code sections in the tax code to date. It is probably the grayest area of the tax code. And to understand that person's ability to fully meet what you need to perform a research credit study. And I think understanding the scope, the fees that they're looking to charge, what those fees cover, and the time that it will take that you need to dedicate to the study. Not that you need to dedicate hours and hours, but you at least have to work with your tax provider to give them what they're asking for and to understand why they're asking for it, and understand that there's a timing in there to where, first of all, you're going to need your number, your credit number for your Form 6765. But along the way, where is the final deliverable going to arrive? All of the support that you need, because there's always a quantitative part of the study, which is the number, and a qualitative part. And how far apart are those deliverables arriving to you? Because I will say for sure, without a doubt, in my career, there have been times where that number comes, and then maybe a year or two later, the rest of the study comes, and that is not a good place to be. But I was always often in a position where I didn't have a choice because of resources, right? And because that larger firm that I was working for didn't always provide me with the resources that I needed in order to provide a shorter time frame between the quantitative and the qualitative. And I will say that a very big differentiator for TaxOps is that we deliver the number and we deliver the final deliverable, the qualitative package, much sooner, as to closer to when you need it.
In fact, at TaxOps, we intentionally, with the providing of the deliverable, we send our last invoice. And so we don't get paid until we deliver. And so, you've tax directors out there, you VP of tax, don't just pay the big four their money without you getting some milestone, some kind of deliverable coming back or a surety that something's getting done. Because it's they need to do it. You need to kind of set it up properly and get it done.
Yes, and our deliverable is higher quality because of the focus that we're able to provide in our studies.
Yep. And even though we're usually charging a bit less or quite a bit less than the big four, we don't have all that middle management partners taking a ton of money from every single, all that overhead costs. And so you need to make sure you have a good, experienced boutique firm like ours that has all that experience and has been there and knows what they're doing. But you don't need to be paying for someone's golf club and all their nice cars. You need to be paying for quality. And so that's a great point.
Yes.
I know there's been thoughts that I've had is, what would I do to make things better for the IRS? There's been even crazy times I thought, I would like to go out and help out the government, help out our country and make, because we
work
could
for the IRS. Yeah.
Maybe at the appeals level. But we've seen so many things. We can see quickly what is way aggressive, what is just normal R&D Section 41 gray, and what is just absolutely good, easily qualifies. And why it takes so long to go through examination, and the engineers at the IRS not really understanding which clear, gray, bad is in their study. And so I would love to help out and make that happen. But yeah, and one thing I've also found is that even taxpayers or directors of tax, that's been around a little bit, they can tell when people are being aggressive. They can tell when they can hide, they think, underneath the cloak of the big four because they're going to fight that battle. Well, true. Nowadays, they've got penalties that can bust the tax preparer. But you, taxpayer, are also still going to get busted. And even if the provider gets busted with penalties, you're going to get continuous audit forever. And so, or for a long time. So you can't just hide under someone big that has a lot of attorneys and a lot of deep pockets. You are affected by that. And we've seen, and then we've taken companies that's had very bad IRS relationships and flipped that around and built that trust on doing the right thing. And you leaders in tax, consider that. Consider making sure you're doing the right thing, and you should claim the gray. If it's in the law, claim it. But when they're being aggressive, don't fall for it. It's going to come back. It'll eventually come back. We TaxOps would love to help you out, and if you need someone just to even test what someone else might be claiming, we'd be glad to do that too. We could certainly say, yeah, that's very aggressive, and you will sleep a lot better at night if you don't claim that kind of thing or don't have somebody else claim that kind of thing for you. But thank you for your time. R&D credit is a great credit. You should claim it, but make sure you're following the law and claiming what you should be claiming, and nothing too crazy that will keep you or your mom up at night about what you're doing. So thank you very much. Thanks, Sean. And take care. We'll see you down the road.